I'm going to begin with a poem that I wrote in the year 2000 when I was 10 years old. It's called The Animal Inside. The animal that lives beneath my pumping heart is a squirrel who just wants to play and dance every single day. He moves about and rolls around in my brain and sometimes is a bit of a pain. So now you know the real me. I hope one day it will be set free. So needless to say, having penned this at the age of only 10, I felt as though starting with it as an introduction was the most appropriate way to begin, as my innate love for writing and being able to essentially immortalize a thought, emotion, or in this instance, my most honest state of being, is a strength that I will lean into as a way of communicating my true self with for those around me. While difficult to recall at what age or moment in time specifically I began to take notice of my innate sense of not belonging to this world, nonetheless, it's a form of existentialism seemingly attached to the very fibers of my being, something that I could never fully explain, I just know is there. Most people closest to me would agree that I've always been on the reserved, shy, quiet side of things growing up, and very much so even into my adult life. Even though I was able to thankfully find ways to develop and maintain a handful of meaningful and healthy relationships through those years, I would still never use the term outgoing or bubbly to describe myself, childhood or adulthood. So saying all that, for me to have made a spiritual connection so early in my life with a squirrel of all animals as my truest internal reflection of self, I feel it speaks volumes to how from a very early age, I consciously chose each day to project outward to others versus how fearful and trapped I truly felt inside of just being myself. It was a struggle I internalized as a coping mechanism to survive the persistent daily onslaught of neurodivergence my entire life. And so as a quick sidebar for context, neurodivergence, it refers to a variation in brain function and processing that differs from what is typically considered normal or neurotypical for most folks. Neurodivergence encompasses a range of conditions, including autism spectrum disorder. That's my personal diagnosis, ADHD, dyslexia, obsessive compulsive disorder, amongst other conditions. It describes a unique way of experiencing the world with differences in cognitive abilities, sensory processing, and social interactions. Neurodivergence is not, however, a disability or a medical diagnosis, but rather a term that recognizes and, in my opinion, more importantly, celebrates the diversity of the human brain. A quick sidebar to that as well, I'm sure most of you have seen and are aware of the evidence coming out that autism is caused by a Tylenol, of all things. Silly as it may sound, funny story, my mother found out she was pregnant with me while on a ski trip with my dad and some other folks and took a nasty fall. Got hurt pretty badly and was actually taken to the hospital. And so the doctor, after running all the tests, and said, hey, by the way, if you didn't know, you're pregnant. And likely, I'd have to confirm this with her to validate that, likely because of the pain she was in, I'm sure she was administered Tylenol. So if you need any proof, RFK or Trump, you're welcome. Playful jab. It emphasizes that all individuals with neurodivergence have different strengths and challenges, and that their experiences should be ultimately respected and accepted. And while few metaphors or analogies exist to fully explain what it feels like to perceive reality as if you're not ever fully participating in it, one such thought experiment that I have found particularly accurate and easy to understand is this. So picture yourself, if you would, for a moment, not as a human being living on Earth, but instead as a fish living in the ocean. And as such, your primary objective is learning how to swim. And around you are millions upon millions of other fish, all appearing vastly different on the outside in size and shape and color, all with unique genetic coding. Yet, in some cosmic miracle of sorts, all are swimming in rhythm and synchronicity with one another. In this case, meant to be, a simple metaphor for the human experience, ocean being our Earth, the other fish being other humans inhabiting it. Now, for a moment, pretend you are a young child, in this case, a small fish. And over time, you begin to take notice of how the bigger fish, adults, are laughing, eating, dancing, and enjoying one another's company and are able to form meaningful bonds with one another. And being perceived as in that everyone else has this indescribably effortless and natural ability to connect with others without the need to have to think about how it's done, equatable to instinctual behavior of an animal. And as a result of this observation and still being a small fish trying to learn how to swim with the other fish, the mission then becomes inherently tainted. Overthinking, overanalyzing become a replacement for being present and experiencing life in the moment with the other fish. You feel as though you're somehow swimming on your own timeline, in your own ocean of sorts, persistently out of sync with the vibrations of the ecosystem around you. Your personal ocean then becomes your innermost sanctuary and begins to cultivate unhealthy thought patterns that convince you swimming alone is easier and more enjoyable than trying to rejoin everyone else in their shared body of water. No matter how hard I may try to simply join in the flow of life and swim with everybody else, something is eternally in the way. An invisible yet tangible barrier of energy between myself and everybody else, as if the ocean I've created for myself to swim in becomes more than just a safety net or a security blanket. It's an alternate ocean, and how I perceive reality is entirely detached from the observable, tangible ocean reality that is collectively perceived, forming a belief that just not meant to ever escape. Concluding the ocean thought experiment at this time, I do hope it was helpful and able to build a better framework of the fundamental predisposition as to how I perceive life. It was something that I never felt comfortable opening up to about anybody during my childhood. Family, friend, it was eternally my own burden to bear, a darkness that I wouldn't dare expose in fear of being further pushed away from the experience that I wished so desperately to join in. Extreme oversensitivity to any external stimuli, as well as sensations internally within my own body, became just so debilitating that it meant building even more unhealthy coping skills to further avoid addressing what was actually happening to me. Thus, in my decision not to be honest with myself or others in a crucial period of my development, I had to, as a result, push the real Sean so far out of the way to make room for a version of me that could effectively just blend in with the rest of the world. If I could pretend just enough and become proficient in wearing a multitude of masks in any social situation to hide behind, to be whomever they wanted me to be instead of who I knew that I was. And now being 35 years old, it would have been impossible to predict the multitude of decisions that I made myself along the way, as well as life experiences I've had and how life would have turned out in getting to be here today sharing this letter. But what I can say with confidence is that in my own observations and my own experience, that all the heartache, the pain, the tragic things that are attached to life that we all collectively feel are necessary to make room for those blissful, cathartic releases of raw, unfiltered happiness to happen. No light without dark, yin without yang, or ebb without flow. It's always a delicate balance of cosmic life force that permeates through all living things, an energy that we must ultimately learn to accept and respect and understand that it is not our duty to attempt to gain control over it. As to provide another culturally relevant example to help explain this energy that I speak of, I'm sure most of you are familiar to some extent with the Disney movie Finding Nemo. For those of you who may not be, just to give a quick synopsis, dive back into the ecosystem of the ocean again, just for a little while. The film tells a story of an overprotective fish named Marlin who sends his young son, Nemo, off to school for the first time. And as a result of an oversight from his teacher, Nemo gets lost in the vast deep blue. And thus, anxious Marlin sets off on a harrowing mission to rescue his son. And along the way, he encounters a number of threats and obstacles and eventually comes across another fish named Dory, who, let's just say, has some very noticeable mental deficiencies that manifest most obviously in the form of extreme forgetfulness or dementia. While Dory is friendly and willing to help Marlin on his adventure, her obvious mental impairments come at a costly measure to the pair's adventure, often severely and majorly distracting and detouring them from the mission objective. But at one point, they come across a large group of sea turtles. The leader of the bunch is a turtle named Crush. And to provide a brief character profile for Crush, just imagine the demeanor of a typical California surfer bum. Just lazy, hazy, and completely aloof and unbothered by anything going on around him. Despite the initial clash in personalities, Marlin and Dory do gravitate to Crush as a result of noticing that their group of turtles is taking advantage of the ocean's currents, riding effortlessly in the gentle push and simply enjoying the ride, so to speak. And once Marlin and Dory decide to join in with the turtles and ride the currents with them, all of a sudden, their anxieties, their worries, their fears, forgetfulness seem to just disappear, even if only for a little while. A blissful feeling of ease, acceptance overtakes the once nervous searchers, and they are finally able to just relax and be happy. Not forcing or fighting anything, just simply being grateful for the moment of peace, however fleeting that may be. And I do hope the analogy provides a useful metaphor once again in how, despite life's many hardships and heartbreaks that spare no soul, lead us collectively down a familiar path of resentment and resignation, pushing us to breaking points and boiling points. There does, however, exist a hidden path that lends to far less anguish, a road less traveled that, if decidedly chosen to be ventured down, does allow for radical acceptance of what is, rather than what we think it should be, and who you authentically are, rather than who you think you should be. Just to add a couple noteworthy quotes on the significance of embracing individuality that resonate most deeply with me. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. It's Ralph Waldo Emerson. To fall in love with yourself is the first secret to happiness. Robert Morley. And perhaps my personal favorite, kept short and sweet, be yourself. Everybody else is already taken. Oscar Wilde. Through prolonged periods of self-reflection, introspection, while I am now thankfully able to embrace the way that I dance with life will always be unique and personal to me, I equally recognize my opportunity to be able to learn to dance with everybody else in a way that is still resonant with the vibrations of my own truth. Not to ever be cured of myself. There's nothing to fix. I love me, and I fully accept myself. As a result of this radical self-love and acceptance, I've learned to equally love and accept others. The golden rule acting as my guiding force and principle, it's now time to finally show the world what it feels like to embrace the animal inside and enjoy the ride.